The air is thick with a restless hum, whispers, shuffling papers, the low creak of polished wood. Then the doors open. Steve Bannon strides in, his confidence filling the space before he speaks a word. Cameras flash, reporters lean forward. He wears that familiar half-smirk, the one that says he's untouchable. The judge enters. A sharp rap of the gavel cuts through the noise. Silence drops heavy, almost sacred. Bannon leans back in his chair, eyes scanning the room like a man surveying territory he already owns. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett sits poised, steady hands, calm breath, gaze unbroken. When she finally rises, her voice slices through the silence with quiet authority. "Mr. Bannon," she begins, her tone measured, almost kind. It's amazing how loud a man can be when he's never had to answer for the echoes he leaves behind. The room stills. Reporters glance up. Even the judge tilts forward, caught off guard by the precision of her words. Bannon's smirk falters, not erased, but cracked. For the first time, there's something new in his eyes. Not fear, recognition. Something tells him, this time, the performance won't go according to script. It hadn't started in this courtroom. It began years earlier, in the fever heat of political rallies and war rooms that reeked of ambition and smoke. Steve Bannon built his empire on rebellion, against norms, against truth, against the very idea of accountability. He wasn't just a man on trial. He was the embodiment of a movement that mistook chaos for courage. Each indictment, each headline became fuel for his mythology. He'd learned to wear accusations like armor, turning every consequence into a new stage. And yet, on this day, that armor seemed thinner. The courtroom light was unforgiving. The microphones, once his allies, now waited for his silence. Across that same room stood Jasmine Crockett, shaped by a different kind of fight. She didn't come from wealth or influence. She came from grit, from classrooms where she was the only one who looked like her, from courtrooms where her calm had to speak louder than bias ever could. While Bannon built walls of noise, she mastered the art of quiet power. Their stories collided like symbols, two Americas locked in an unspoken duel, one built on entitlement and spectacle, the other on resilience and truth. And somewhere deep inside that echoing chamber, everyone felt it. This wasn't just a case, it was a reckoning. But no one yet knew who would walk out with history on their side. Before the courtroom lights and the silence that followed, Steve Bannon had been a master of the noise. He was the man who once stood behind podiums draped in flags, who whispered into the ears of power and convinced them chaos was strategy. He built a following not through unity, but through division. Each headline, each outrage, another brick in the empire of resentment he carefully constructed. There was a time when presidents listened to him, when television networks begged for his quotes, when every scandal only seemed to sharpen his legend. He called himself a disruptor, a word that made the powerful nervous and his followers proud. But beneath the swagger lived a man addicted to attention, someone who mistook shock for strength. Now, stripped of the stage lights and spin rooms, his confidence had curdled into something heavier. In this courtroom, the rules were different. Here, interruptions were contempt. Here, the walls didn't echo applause. Still, he couldn't help himself. He shifted in his seat, leaning forward as though to remind the world he was still in control. His smirk, famous, defiant, hovered like a mask he no longer knew how to remove. He'd built his brand on intimidation, and yet, every time his gaze met Jasmine Crockett's, it faltered just slightly. He'd underestimated her, as he'd underestimated countless women before, believing composure was weakness, mistaking restraint for fear. But Crockett wasn't here to play his game. She'd studied men like him her entire career, those who weaponized arrogance as armor, who believed volume could rewrite truth. And as the room prepared for her next move, Bannon sat there, unaware that his greatest flaw had already been exposed, not his ideology, but his inability to see the quiet power gathering right in front of him. What came next would teach him exactly what silence could do. Long before the cameras found her, before the headlines framed her as a rising force, Jasmine Crockett was just a young woman in Texas, learning how to speak truth in rooms that didn't always want to hear it. She grew up watching people work hard for respect they were never given, watching her community outthink systems designed to keep them small. In classrooms where her hand was raised but her voice was ignored, she learned a lesson that would shape her forever. Sometimes power isn't about volume, it's about control. Law school refined that fire into precision. While others memorized cases, she studied people, their tells, their fears, the cracks in their confidence. When she spoke, professors leaned forward. When she argued, peers fell silent. She didn't seek attention, she commanded focus. And when the time came to step into public life, she carried that same quiet authority into every hearing, every confrontation, every challenge that tried to shake her resolve. In a world that rewards outrage, Jasmine mastered composure. She'd faced belittling comments disguised as humor, backhanded compliments meant to remind her of her place. She smiled through them, not out of weakness but discipline. Every smirk she ignored became another ounce of strength. Every attempt to dismiss her became a case study in patience. By the time she arrived in Washington, she was more than a lawmaker. She was a strategist of grace. Her empathy wasn't softness, it was calculation. She knew that anger could win a moment, but calm could win a legacy. And yet beneath that composure beat a heart that burned for justice, for those who didn't have her platform, her mic, her chance to speak back. So when she found herself staring across that courtroom at Steve Bannon, the man who built his brand on bluster, she wasn't intimidated. She was ready. Every moment of dismissal, every test of restraint, every quiet battle she'd fought in a country that too often demanded she prove her worth had led here. And as she prepared her next words, a knowing calm settled in her chest. She didn't need to match his noise. She only needed to make him hear her silence. The question was, would the nation hear it too? The first exchange came like a spark. Bannon leaned forward, voice thick with sarcasm. "Counselor, are we here to debate facts or feelings today?" His words floated across the room, meant to draw laughter, to remind everyone that he still knew how to play to a crowd. Crockett didn't blink. "Facts," she said evenly, "though I understand they've never been your strong suit." A ripple moved through the room, half gasp, half stifled chuckle. The judge's brow lifted. Cameras clicked faster now. Bannon straightened, clearing his throat, his smirk returning like muscle memory. "You're out of your depth," he said. "You don't know the game being played here." Crockett met his eyes, calm and steady. "Oh, I know it. I just refuse to lose my soul playing it." The air thickened. Even the court stenographer paused for a heartbeat before typing again. Bannon shifted in his seat, leaning closer, as if proximity could regain control. His voice rose, too loud, too forceful. "You think your moral high ground means something? You're standing on sand." Crockett tilted her head slightly, her voice still calm. "Then it's strange you seem so nervous standing across from me." The line landed like a verdict. Murmurs erupted again. Soft gasps, nervous laughter, the sound of tension breaking only to rebuild. For the first time, Bannon hesitated, his hands clasped together, his foot tapped, his gaze darted, not toward Crockett, but toward the cameras, searching for an audience that wasn't answering back. Crockett, meanwhile, didn't move. Her stillness became its own kind of dominance, her silence louder than his words. Each question she posed cut closer to the truth. Each answer he dodged exposed the cracks in his performance. And with every passing minute, the balance shifted, not through force, but through control. Something in the room had turned. Bannon felt it. Everyone did. The question now wasn't whether he would win. It was how long he could keep pretending he already had. For a long moment, the air stood still. So still it seemed the walls themselves were listening. Bannon leaned back in his chair, trying to recapture his rhythm, the old confidence that had carried him through countless interviews and interrogations. "You don't understand how power works," he sneered. "You think it's about who's right. It's about who controls the room." Crockett didn't rise to the bait. She folded her hands on the table, her voice calm, almost soft. "Control," she echoed. "That's a funny word coming from someone who spent his life losing it the moment accountability walks in." The courtroom shifted. A few reporters looked up from their laptops, sensing something changing. Bannon's smirk twitched. "You think you're teaching me about accountability? I built movements. I shaped presidents. What have you built?" She met his glare evenly. "Bridges," she said, "between people you've spent years trying to tear apart." A hush fell, deeper this time. Bannon laughed, a forced, brittle sound. "Spare me the sermon. The world doesn't run on sentiment. It runs on strength." "And strength," Crockett replied, "means nothing if it's built on fear." Her words didn't rise in volume, but in weight. Each one seemed to hang in the air a little longer than the last. She began dismantling his arguments with surgical precision. Every false claim, every exaggerated boast unraveled by a simple question, a quiet fact, a line of reasoning so clear it left no room for bluster. When he tried to interrupt, she paused and waited, silently, until his own echo embarrassed him. When he twisted her words, she repeated them, slower this time, until even he had to hear their truth. "You've built a career on telling people what to hate," she said, her gaze steady. "But hate is a shallow well, Mr. Bannon. It dries up the moment someone starts drawing water from a deeper one." The room was frozen. The cameras whirred softly, recording every breath. Bannon blinked, visibly thrown, searching for a retort. Nothing came. Crockett leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, just assured. "You call yourself a patriot, but the kind of love you sell for this country sounds an awful lot like fear of losing control. And that's not patriotism. That's panic." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. The judge's pen stilled mid-note. A guard near the door coughed and then regretted it instantly. Somewhere in the back, a journalist's fingers hovered over the keyboard, suspended between disbelief and awe. Bannon opened his mouth, then closed it again. The smirk was gone now, replaced by something almost human. Fatigue, perhaps. Realization. The moment he'd mocked was now defining him. Crockett let the pause stretch, then delivered her final line, one that would later echo through headlines, social feeds, and dinner-table conversations across the country. "The loudest man in the room," she said, is usually the one most afraid of being forgotten. Silence. Not a stunned silence this time, but reverent. Even the walls seemed to breathe differently. In that instant, the dynamic reversed. Bannon's shadow, once looming, seemed to shrink. Crockett didn't need victory declared. It was already evident in the stillness that followed. Someone in the gallery exhaled audibly. Another whispered, "Wow." The judge's pen stilled mid-note. A guard near the door coughed and then regretted it instantly. Somewhere in the back, a journalist's fingers hovered over the keyboard, suspended between disbelief and awe. Bannon opened his mouth, then closed it again. The smirk was gone now, replaced by something almost human. Fatigue, perhaps. Realization. The moment he'd mocked was now defining him. Crockett let the pause stretch, then delivered her final line, one that would later echo through headlines, social feeds, and dinner table conversations across the country. "The loudest man in the room," she said, "is usually the one most afraid of being forgotten." Silence. Not a stunned silence this time, but reverent. Even the walls seemed to breathe differently. In that instant, the dynamic reversed. Bannon's shadow, once looming, seemed to shrink. Crockett didn't need victory declared. It was already evident in the stillness that followed. Someone in the gallery exhaled audibly. Another whispered, "Wow." The judge cleared his throat but didn't speak. For a brief, perfect moment, there was nothing but the sound of truth settling into place. Outside that courtroom, the world was already reacting. Phones buzzed, clips uploaded, hashtags began to form like sparks. Hashtag Crockett cuts through, hashtag silence in the hall, hashtag leadership looks like this. But inside, Jasmine Crockett stood motionless, the faintest trace of a smile at the corner of her lips. Not triumph, not gloating, but relief, the kind that comes when noise finally meets its match. And as the cameras kept rolling, she turned slightly toward Bannon, her voice barely above a whisper, but clear enough for every microphone to catch. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about what truth sounds like when it finally gets a turn to speak." The nation would spend days replaying that moment, but in the room itself, it ended in perfect, resonant quiet. The kind of silence only power, finally unmasked, can leave behind. The silence in that courtroom didn't stay contained. It exploded outward, rippling across screens within minutes. The clip hit social media like a lightning strike. On X, it became the #1 trending topic before the hour was up. Hashtag Crockett cuts through. Someone looped the final moment, Crockett's calm stare, Bannon's stunned silence over a slow instrumental track. It played like a cinematic ending to a film no one knew they needed. On TikTok, duets began stacking like dominoes. Teachers, lawyers, teenagers in dorm rooms, they all mouthed her words. The loudest man in the room is usually the one most afraid of being forgotten. Every lip sync felt like a quiet rebellion, a collective sigh that said, "Finally, someone stood up and didn't back down." YouTube reactors couldn't upload fast enough. Titles blazed across thumbnails. Bannon destroyed by Crockett's calm precision. A masterclass in composure when intelligence wins. Comment sections overflowed with admiration and relief. Cable news scrambled to catch up. Analysts gossiped at her tone, her poise, her refusal to raise her voice. It wasn't just a legal moment, it was cultural, one commentator said. In an era of chaos, Crockett reminded America what dignity under fire looks like. And as the takes piled up, Bannon's own silence began to take on its own life. The man who built an empire on outrage had nothing to say. No podcast rants, No statements, no spin, just quiet, echoing through feeds that once amplified his every word. The contrast became the story itself, one side shouting for attention, the other commanding it without noise. On Reddit threads and Facebook groups, a new kind of conversation began, not about the scandal, but about tone, about restraint, about leadership that doesn't need to yell to be heard. And somewhere between the viral clips and think pieces, a single sentiment kept repeating, whispered through comment sections like a chorus. Finally, someone stood up and didn't back down. But as the praise poured in, another question began to surface. If truth had finally found its voice, how long before power tried to silence it again? When the cameras finally dimmed and the chatter of the hallway faded, Jasmine Crockett remained seated for a moment longer. The echoes of the day still hung in the air, words that had sliced through arrogance, truth that had landed like a gavel. She didn't smile for the cameras or bask in victory. She simply exhaled, steady and sure, because this had never been about winning a moment. It had been about proving one. In the days that followed, people replayed her every line, studying not just what she said, but how she said it. There was power in her restraint, a reminder that composure isn't weakness, it's discipline. That dignity doesn't whisper because it's timid. It whispers because it knows shouting isn't always how truth gets heard. Her closing reflection would later be quoted on screens, murals, and commencement speeches alike. Dignity, truth, and accountability aren't partisan virtues. They're American ones. Simple, steady, unapologetically clear. It was the kind of message that outlived the headlines. In an age where chaos too often masquerades as courage, Crockett's stillness became a revelation. She hadn't matched Bannon's volume, she'd exposed its emptiness. She'd shown that real strength isn't in domination, it's in self-control. The courtroom became a metaphor for something larger, a nation in its own trial, deciding daily whether it would be ruled by noise or guided by principle. Every glare, every pause, every deliberate word had been a test of who we are when power confronts decency. And for a fleeting, unforgettable moment, decency won. The country didn't erupt in celebration, it simply paused, collectively, reflectively. People across divides saw themselves in that calm defiance, in that unwavering poise. For once, America wasn't watching a fight. It was witnessing a standard being set. Crockett walked out of the courthouse into a golden dusk, her phone buzzing with messages she hadn't yet read. She didn't need to. She knew what they said. And as the headlines rolled on, one truth lingered quietly behind them, that in a world addicted to noise, calm intelligence can still change the temperature of a room, a conversation, even a country. The moment wasn't just hers, it belonged to everyone who still believed that grace, when wielded with courage, could stand taller than any podium of power. And that was the moment. Steve Bannon, stunned into silence by Jasmine Crockett's defense. A clash that began as spectacle, ended as lesson. In a time when shouting has become strategy, one woman's composure reminded the nation that dignity still disarms arrogance, and truth still outlasts performance. Crockett didn't win with volume. She won with presence. She showed that the real strength of America isn't in who speaks the loudest, but in who listens, stands firm, and speaks with purpose. If you believe calm courage still has a place in this country, if you believe grace can still overcome noise, share this story. Let it be a reminder that truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. Subscribe for more stories where reason, resolve, and humanity still matter. Because in a world addicted to outrage, composure may just be the most radical act of all.